Our final speaker of the block is Professor Bill Buchanan, professor at the Centre for Distributed Computing, Networks and Security at Edinburgh Napier University and the Cyber Academy. I think also probably has the longest title of anyone we've had on stage so far. Ladies and gentlemen, Bill Buchanan.
Thank you. So I'm the last speaker before lunch, so you'll be desperate for me to finish. So I'm part of what's called the Block Pass Identity Lab, and that's been built in Edinburgh. So we have funding for research. It's the first blockchain identity lab in the world which is focused on research. We think sovereign identity is a core part of building a new world and a new society. Unfortunately, few of our governments have implemented something that's scalable and is trusted by the citizen. So I'm going to give you an overview of how to build a more trusted and citizen-centric future. And it's up to all of us to really understand this in the context of the new world that we're actually creating. And I saw this quote, and I forgot where I took it from, but cryptography is fixing all the problems that we've set up with our internet. It's a sticking plaster. SSL became our protocols. We added in a bit of crypto, and we called it SSL and TLS. It's a sticking plaster. It basically is there to protect the tunnel. What happens on either end really is unprotected. So cryptography has been focused on improving our system security. But we think that cryptography should be contributing to improving our society. That's a pretty fundamental thing to say there, that the future of our society depends at the lowest level on cryptography. Just like we built the buildings of this city in the past, we need to be building the future on cryptography and make sure that we're building a digital trust infrastructure, but that we also have human trust. So data privacy, resilience, and sharing will be a core part of building this new world. For the first time, citizens will be in control. So we can't really start a presentation without bringing up GDPR. It happened, and it's now with us. And we kind of thought, well, it's over. What do we do now? What we need to realize is that all of the IT systems, virtually every single thing that we've created is legacy and needs to be stopped. It needs to be migrated away because it doesn't have core principles built into it. At the core of GDPR is the citizens' rights to own their own data. How many companies here could stand up and say that citizens really can own and control and get access to their own data? Very few, especially our larger companies. They've harvested data, they've kept data and sold it on. Another part, we need to be smarter to be able to respond to incidents 72 hours, and we need to be able to detect quicker. And then we need to make sure that we have the concept of pseudonymity. If somebody can describe pseudonymity here in good detail, then I'll be extremely impressed. I have no idea what that really means. To me, you're either anonymized or you're not. Pseudonymity is a flawed model that we need to move away from quickly as a turning point and move towards anonymity if it's required. And then the core of everything that we should be doing in our future is encryption. Encryption must be our starting point for everything that we do. Signed transactions, protected, proof, verification. We need to articulate to society what it is encryption and cryptography is actually doing so that someone can look at a green padlock on a web page and understand what that really means. So that's at the core. In pseudonymity, really, we design systems where we might keep some personal details away from our records. So our patient record here has a patient identifier. That's a pseudonym. In the days of paper, that sat on a doctor's desk and it had a little number on the top and you couldn't spot that. In a digital world, it's not that difficult to map a pseudo-identifier to an individual. And once you've done it for all the records. So we need to move much more towards the distributed ledger approach in our data infrastructures. And it isn't just to put in our pseudo-anonymization into our ledger, because that can be unpicked. We need to understand how we create the salt and how we create the identifier, the seed of the identity, and where that is. I can't believe companies still store passwords. They still store hashed passwords. In these days that you don't have to store a hash version of a password, companies still store them, leaving themselves open. More and more companies need to understand they need to create virtually no presence of the identity on their system and give the identifier, the seed, back to the individual and put it onto their phone. In that way, they're now physically pushing the identity back to the citizen. So I received this just the other day. I thought, good, now I have an identity for an election register in my home city, Edinburgh. That's great. Sent as an email. And do we trust email? No. Not one single email that you receive can ever be trusted. In fact, your Outlook probably blocks the one that is digitally signed. So I received that and I clicked on the link and I went there and oops, it's not secure. So how can we build up trust if we send our users from an email message with a link to an untrusted site? And then on the page, it says, please be assured that this email is genuine. Oh, you can't make it up, really? You can't make it up. They have no investment. We have investment in companies. Governments don't have investment in serious developers and so on. You can trust this email, it says on the website. How crazy is that? And that's about as genuine as that. So this is, I receive lots of these and I keep them all. I do follow them up, by the way. You can have a look. We do follow up these things. And this was sent from the Deputy Secretary General to me to say that I've actually won some money. That's as credible as that email that I received about my important thing to do with an election. And just in case you're wondering, he does exist. That's him there. And I have no idea if it was from him or not. Perhaps I should follow up and I could get some money. Thank you, UN. I really appreciate you sending me money. But what are the roadblocks? The roadblocks are that we need to build a world with zero-knowledge proof and with homomorphic encryption. If you're interested, you can go to the website that was set up and find all about the cryptography involved. But those are the two core things. Bob sends Peggy into a cave. Peggy wants to prove that she knows the secret passphrase to get through the interconnection tunnel. So he lets her go in. She picks her own route, A or B, and she stands there, and Bob shouts, appear through B. If Peggy appears through B, then he's proven a little bit that she actually knows the password. She could have used B, but if she's on A, she'll not be able to get to B. So Bob has proven that Peggy doesn't know the secret password. So he keeps sending her in, and more, when he sends her in, she's able to come out through the right entrance. That's the core of zero-knowledge proof. But the future of computing is towards homomorphic encryption. And homomorphic encryption allows us to process We process data in an encrypted way and still end up with the results that we require. So Craig Gentry defines this as having special gloves that you can operate on the jewels in a jewel box. And the workers can work in the jewel box without actually opening up the jewel box. So more and more, we need to be working around these two core areas. Zcash uses it and uses ZK snarks to be able to provide this. But look at the performance hit. Look at the performance hit it takes to actually create the proof for the zero-knowledge proof. Massive, massive overhead. And this is the problem with both homomorphic encryption and homomorphic encryption and zero-knowledge, is there is a massive overhead in the actual production at the time. So basically it works. I can take encrypted values from Bob and Alice. I, as a data processor, can then add, subtract, divide, multiply, find things, and I, as a data processor, cannot tell what the values were and what the result actually is. That's a perfectly secure world because processing in memory is the biggest problem. You can stop a virtual machine. You can look at its memory. Its memory will have all its variables. It'll have keys and things like that. So we need to move much more towards this type of world. And then we can do things like finding out who's older between Bob and Alice without actually having to ask the name. So the concept of Trent will disappear. The content of trust. What's the core of trust on the internet? PKI. Does anybody understand digital certificates? Yes. Over here, maybe. Few people in the industry understand PKI and digital certificates. It's a flawed system. The hackers now can buy let's encrypt certificates for $0. So don't trust the green padlock anymore. It's a flawed system because we're still relying on these trusted core identifiers that we didn't actually elect. And what happens if they get hacked? What happens if Google's private key gets leaked to the internet? How little could we trust in that world? So we should be able to start to be thinking about the kind of things that we might want to ask without revealing any core information. And that is a GDPR proper world. So the way it works is you take your values, you have a secret key, you can do your function, get the result back, and you can decrypt it. The core of it is actually to create what are called Cypher Bits. These are little ones and zeros, and then we operate on the Cypher Bits in a logical way, just like logical circuits, and then we decipher them and we convert them back to the numbers again. So it's almost like we need to rebuild all our computing libraries, even just to add and subtract and multiply. We need new libraries which will operate on little Cypher Bits. Look at any of the Cypher Bits and you will not be able to determine what the actual original value was. If you're interested, there's the crypto behind it. It's not fantastic maths. It's quite simple in there, but we're dealing with individual ones and zeros. There's what an adder looks like. If you remember, maybe from school time, a 2-bit adder looks like that. We build our crypto based on an electronic circuit. So the circuit becomes our mathematical generator for this. And we can see companies like IBM building massive computers to be able to cope with the requirement for this type of world. Because processing will be key to make sure that we preserve the secrecy of the data. And then what we can do is that we can mine across our blocks and we can put encrypted data onto the blockchain and then use homomorphic encryption to be able to do simple things like what we have to do to find out that Bob has got enough money to spend on his account. But should we be revealing how much Bob has got in his account, and should we be revealing who he's spending money with? And the answer in GDPR is no. And until we get that problem solved, we will not get our citizens to take their money from their banks and put it onto the blockchain, because they're hanging up their washing for everyone to see. So ZK Snark brings along two contributions. Hidden homomorphic is that I can feed values into a smart contract, and the smart contract cannot tell what those values are. It can quite happily operate on them in the right way and give me back the result, but there's no way that the smart contract can tell what the input and the output values are. It also allows for what's called blind evaluation. I can use a smart contract, but there is no way I can determine what the mechanics is of the smart contract. That's kept secret to the user of the smart contract. The one system that could do this is in development. And the Hawk system allows for the smart contract to be held off the blockchain and still be trusted. So it binds the smart contract to be running from a cryptography point of view off the blockchain, but it doesn't take up the processing requirement required for the main blockchain. An example of some code is this for a smart contract. So Hawk could provide us with a way that we can start to relieve the load on the Ethereum blockchain by running smart contracts that can run anywhere. And CryptoKitties has been spoken about. And CryptoKitties showed that we could have ended up with a bottleneck. So at the time, we kind of reached the limit of what was possible in Ethereum, but have managed to push through. But to fundamentally push the barrier, we need to scale up even more. And the transaction speeds really, Repo can't be included as a proper blockchain type solution, but it achieves rates that are moving towards Visa. But if we need to move Ethereum and Bitcoin up that scale to overtake Visa, we need new methods to be able to implement this, because we've now come to a bottleneck and it needs to be removed. So the solutions that are currently being proposed are around Sharding and Casper. So Sharding is a bit like our old economies, where each of the islands are able to trade and keep their own ledger and work independently. And all we really need to do is, if the islands trade with each other, is that we have some transaction system, that we keep some receipt system that shows that one island has transacted with another one. That's the sharding method. Casper brings a method where we move away from the waste of energy, of proof of work, towards a proof of stake. And sharding works by having a global root, and then you create shards. Whether this will work is yet to be seen, but we're now going to trust shards to look after their own ecosystem. And that would work because in most of the applications we develop, we create a little ecosystem where we just trade amongst that system, and only occasionally do we have to jump out and communicate with another system. So the model that's proposed is this one. We're going to have a shard, which will have an ID as we create them. And then each shard will keep its own transactions and receipts for those transactions. And then we will have an interconnect record, which will actually define, if you can go to it, when the two shards communicate with each other. So a receipt will be sent from one shard to another. That will be processed, and then a confirmation will be sent back. And in that way, that shards can ease the burden on the overall blockchain. And it's not really been thought through completely yet, but we'll have to see if it works. So it's there as a development platform for those to develop applications. Casper also tries to move away from the proof of work method, which is really burning up too much energy, and move towards a proof of stake in there. And it's reckoned that the amount of work that will be required to secure the block will drop from 1,500 Ether to only 32. So the problem just now is that we just make it too difficult, too expensive for somebody to take over the network. Make it too expensive, and it's going to cost them a lot in electricity. But with a proof of stake, we drop it down into 32 Ethers. So those are the things that are now starting to change and scale up. And what we want from our health, and many countries want this, is that we've built up a health system which is clinician-focused. We revolve around clinicians, and they tell us what they want, and we book appointments with them, and so on. Most countries want to move towards a citizen as an active commissioner, and for citizens to take control of their own health and well-being. In blockchain, the areas of possible innovation are multiple. So we can see electronic health records are an obvious one, but things like asset tracking, e-prescribing systems are almost a no-brainer in terms of their application. It just seems a natural thing to put an automated prescription system onto a blockchain. And the problem with healthcare is that you will see someone go through multiple paths, and they will have multiple illnesses. And only with a blockchain can you actually create a health record or an audit trail which can actually determine where a patient is at any given time. And in areas like health insurance, we can start to audit and make sure the smart contracts will enact and make payments automatically. So when certain milestones are delivered in healthcare, we can make sure that the payments actually happen. But it's also important in things like the recall of equipment. So in this case, 500,000 pacemakers were found to have a software problem and needed to be updated. Many health agencies don't keep records of which pacemaker went in which patient. So we could actually have an asset tracking system in healthcare which made sure that if we needed to, we'd be able to trace where assets were and help the patient. In pharma, in clinical trials, there is many problems with fraud that a blockchain solution would make sure that we could trace through any pharma and clinical trials. So what we're working on at the present time is an asset tracking system for health where we can track a device from its creation to its disposal at the end. And in that way, you can actually understand the dynamics of how devices are used within a healthcare environment, and you can quickly recall on the case where there is a problem with the software, and you know exactly where all of your devices are. So just now, we're not putting the core data onto the blockchain. We're doing what most people will do, is to put the record of the device into a trusted agency and put a signed record, a thumbprint onto the blockchain. Not perfect, because the trusted agency could not give you back the data or might delete it, and so on. So there are better models that would allow you to be able to set up a trust network. A better solution is that devices should be created with a private key and should be able to sign themselves onto the blockchain. In this way, they provide their public key, and the public key can then be proven on the blockchain. Unfortunately, few devices are ever created with any sort of identity. And the problem is that RFID devices don't have the computing power to be able to do complex public key encryption methods. So really, it's open for us, but if we can create a system that starts to track assets, we can understand the full cost of a device, even when it leaves the hospital. Where does it go? How does it get decommissioned? And are we making sure that things are disposed of correctly? So our vision of the future will look something like this. Much more citizen-focused. There is the possibility of a personal health record. The identity is owned by the citizen and not by the healthcare provider. The transactions which need to be public are there. And then the rights to create, write, update, and delete are there for both the citizen and the clinician. The deletion of data is our biggest problem that we need to address as an industry. GDPR asks for it. If somebody wants to delete their data off the blockchain, what are you going to do? And the only way you can do it to stay, I've trampled the encryption key. I have erased the encryption key. You can have a look, you will not find it. Do you think lawyers understand that concept? If I get access to an encrypted object, is that a hack or not? Just because I've deleted the encryption key and it's going to take me a zillion years with all the resources in the world to break that, is that still a data breach? So more and more we need to be enacting around smart contracts, and we need to make sure our ecosystem works. And this will help small businesses to come in and provide small services. If I want to provide a service for 1 hour to change bandages in my local area, I can come into my ecosystem. I can get paid through health tokens and so on. And this creates a much healthier economy for healthcare. But more and more, it increases trust. It increases trust because we do know that mistakes happen. And they happen for all the most unfortunate of reasons. And we need to address that by having verifiable audit trails that can actually enact smart contracts and understand where the patient has been and what actually happened. So the deletion of data is an important part of this smart contract. So our world, and this is what we're building just now, looks like this. If I want free bus travel in Edinburgh when I'm age 60, I should walk on a bus and automatically I shouldn't have to pay. A smart contract somewhere has created an attestation for me, and I store it somewhere, and has enacted a smart contract, so when I walk on a bus, I will get free transport. So there needs to be a sovereign identity. There needs to be assignations that are signed by trusted entities. So we need to create ecosystems which we can sign, and especially in healthcare, for certain things. Just as we've done in the past with pieces of paper, we need specialists to digitally sign attestations, just like we do with certificates, and then store these and use these to act on our blockchain. And our healthcare, our social care, our government systems should be ready, and it should be well defined what those contracts are. That scares a lot of legal professionals. The amount of time and effort wasted with paperwork and signatures, and the whole process makes it extremely difficult. So our world will change, and it will probably move towards something more like this. So here's a smart contract for social care. Sounds very simple, but this is just providing care for somebody to wash their dishes, clean the windows, and so on. So up front, the smart contract's defined. There's an hourly rate. There is qualification levels. There's a time taken. We can actually measure the amount of time. And up front, if we can prove the inputs into the smart contract, we can make the whole system work. We're incentivizing people here to improve their qualifications because they know in the smart contract, if they can provide the evidence, they will get a higher rate for this. Things become more open and more sustainable. So we would like to build a more trustworthy system. I do cryptography, so I can build digital trust. What's missing is the human trust element. Estonia gives one of the best examples that I've seen for human trust. The Estonian system for healthcare means that any public sector person who views one of your records, the citizen is allowed to question why that has happened. And that public sector individual must respond back within a certain time limit to say why they looked at your records. That is human trust in action. I can provide the best serial knowledge, the best homomorphic encryption. The best encryption doesn't matter. They just hope, citizens hope that that's all going to happen anyway, and it obviously doesn't. What we need to do is to make sure that our citizens really understand that what we're building is something that's on their side. So I go back to this again, is that cryptography has been focused on the sticking plaster of our systems, and it needs to build a new world, and you are the people to do it. Thank you.